Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Brendan Angelides, the composer on Super Pumped, The Battle for Uber, starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Uber co-founder, Travis Kalanick. It's a great show on Showtime. Brendan, I'm so excited to speak with you. I know you worked with Super Pumped creators, Brian Kaufman, David Levine on Billions for many seasons. When they approached you to do the music for this series, I guess what were your early conversations like, and like how you wanted this to sound?
Yeah, so they gave the general guidance of they wanted it to be electronic in nature and obviously differentiated from Billions. So that was the first creative challenge to like get in there, and how will that feel, what would that look like, all that type of stuff. They distinctly did not want piano. They distinctly didn't want any type of traditional instrumentation, any kind of string related stuff, anything like that. They really wanted it to be something that was kind of taught electronic, and to be able to play with those sounds while differentiating enough for Billions. That was the first creative conversations. And I will say, just like Billions, David and Brian, they give me like massive creative freedom. They just kind of let me just go and do my thing, and then we kind of circle back to figure out the general right angle and all that type of stuff. And it went the same with Super Pumped as well. That was the general bird's eye view, and then go off and explore, and we'll see where we land type of thing. That was the first goalpost.
That's awesome. So I'm in my limited perspective, I love the electronic sound on this, and it reminded me. It almost sounds like it reminded me a little of like a John Carpenter horror movie score a little, and I think it plays really well. But so that's my limited perspective. I would love to like, what were your maybe influences, or what were you thinking? Because I do think there is like, it does, the making it electronic like it is, I think makes it feel almost like a thriller, which I think sometimes the show does feel like a thriller, even though it's not, you know what I mean? And I just would like, yeah, like I'd love to hear like what were your thoughts on like the influences on that, or what you were thinking to make it sound like it does.
Totally. So for me, I definitely wanted to lean into this idea of a rise and fall. So there's this charismatic leader who's kind of like pulling everybody along with his vision, at times, towards the beginning, at times just kind of intensely, and then towards later, obviously very, very intensely, and in many wrong ways and stuff. And I essentially just wanted to find a palette that where I could have those moments go into like, I want to be able to find this person's darkest, most bottom kind of place, the darkest side of things, while still retaining a sense of heart, right? So it's an interesting character and an interesting casting choice too for Joseph Gordon-Levitt. It's like I think one of the intentions that they had was wanting to make sure we never lost the heart of this person, even though clearly that was being lost, right? And there's like these conflicted feelings, the social dialogue, the narrative around Uber and everything, and but then also at the same time, so many people using that service, myself included, at times in the past. And so I approached it from that as a bird's eye view. I want to make sure I can hit those dark points while also having that humanity. I want to be able to hit stuff that feels very cold while also being able to retain that kind of heart, and in terms of influences, there wasn't anything in particular that I kind of gravitated towards to kind of get reference points. The only thing I genuinely was mindful of was the social network, of just knowing that that's such a large cultural thing that was there, and being mindful to not step into that territory. And just
right.
And luckily, having worked with them in the past and Billions and everything, just knowing to stick in my kind of aesthetic and play in those places. And the next big step, so Randy Poster and I had a good conversation at the beginning. We were talking about this idea of this kind of rise and fall idea. He brought up this idea of this kind of modern tragedy, and what that might look like on picture and everything. And so with that, I ended up writing the theme, a piano version of it, just to kind of like sink my teeth into what it could feel like. And from there, I wanted to make something that had this rise and fall quality to it, a certain bit of edge, while also having a sense of tragedy to it, right? So it's kind of this almost frenetic, propulsive character who's just kind of driving this whole thing, while almost like the humanity is kind of like going up and kind of coming down. And so that was kind of the general, the goalpost theme wise, and musically stepping in.
I love the theme, and you do a great. It's such an and you have, I think, on the soundtrack, I believe you have both your main theme that's on like the show, and then the piano theme that you were just talking about is at the end,
Yeah.
end of the soundtrack. So if you're watching this, and like, you should go listen to it. It's on Spotify and like all streaming platforms. It's really quite good. I've been listening to it before we spoke. I just love it. But you do a great thing in the theme where it kind of like almost stops cold. You dip it down really low, the volume and everything, and then it kind of like builds back up at the end. And I found that such a great choice, and it made me sit up and pay attention more to the theme, especially when I was watching the show, right? Like, and you're watching those main titles. I just thought that was such a cool decision, and not something I really hear a lot in music, where you're kind of like pulling it all the way back before you bring it back up. Can you talk about that? Just like that little tweak. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, I think that was just an instinctual thing of playing with that rise and fall, playing with this sense of, there's a lot of recalibrating in this character throughout the whole entire thing, right? Like, he's being assessed from like people around him. He's recalibrating and assessing himself, or people wanting to recalibrate him while he's still just kind of driven like this. And it was just playing with this general feeling of like the floor is falling out also, like you have nothing else to stand on type of thing, and trying to continually like come back from these crazy scenarios that were happening, like the chain progression of really intense PR things that were happening, one after another, one after another and after another. And the goal is to just kind of encapsulate that feeling of like, oh, the bottom is out. Okay, going to rise back in with this intensity. Bottom's out. Kind of go back again,
Yeah, it's really cool. I think it comes across so well in that theme, and just in general. You mentioned, you mentioned Randy Poster. I know he was music supervisor, and obviously I think Brian and David in general are known for their great use of pop music from Billions. In this show, there's so much Pearl Jam and like a lot of like really great songs. Obviously you're not like, what are the like, how do you think about that? Is like, are you concerned with, or not concerned, but do you think about how your score will fit in with their needle drops, let's say, or like how that kind of relationship works between you and Randy and stuff like that?
Yeah, totally. For this show, it worked the same with Billions, in the sense that we've had those conversations in the past. I think in the first season of Billions, that was a conversation Brian, David, and I had, where they were enthused and stoked on the idea of it being a completely different universe, and they really loved it feeling like the environment of this place had its aesthetic, and then these were able to pop in with their own kind of narrative storytelling with those needle drops. And the only thing I had to worry about was just a logistic standpoint, making sure the key and the pitch fade together and that type of stuff. But that for me also gave me the freedom where I didn't have to cater to what the needle drops were doing stylistically, only in the sense of functional stuff, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. I want to ask you another one, just not to just make this totally about like, oh, what about this track? But I love there's a, I think it's called the I have it written here. The women of Uber are finally heard. I love that scene, and I love that I think that piece of music is so great. And again, I think slightly a little different and more, and like you were mentioning earlier, like very heartbreaking, especially for the sequence and like what's happening there. I guess, can you talk a little about that, and like how you thought about that piece of music, and also how it fits into the show in general?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a big moment. I had known about some of the stuff going on at Uber, but obviously learned way more having worked on this. And it was crazy to see that side of things, particularly female workers at the workplace and what was going on around that. And it was such a stark, just distinct creative choice at that moment, finally, to have Ariana Huffington in that scenario, Uma Thurman to be guiding that process there, and then to have that process also be completely silent, which is a really notable thing that they intentionally did, from my understanding of having this scene of the women finally being heard, and the viewer is experiencing that silence, which speaks volumes to what is happening out there, and things that have been coming to light. And so for me, I wanted to just tap into, as a couple minute part, I had this kind of tapestry to be able to sink into something that felt distinct for that moment, and not just hyper tied to the main theme or anything like that, but like its own kind of heartfelt, kind of just heavy. There's a weight to it. The first sound I made in that cue in particular was like the heaviest part. It's just like this constant low thing kind of holding the whole thing together that shifts around a bit, yeah, but that was the way in, and I kind of just followed that feeling of yeah, it's another extension of like the modern tragedy thing.
Yeah, it's really great. It's I think that part is so great, and I thought your music for it is so incredible. When you're, I mean, like how, like what is your process like? I guess in general, like when you're sitting down, do you find yourself like when you get an idea for this, when you finally get to that theme or the main theme of the show, and then you're building off of that for the rest of the score, like does it come really quick to you, or like is it like what is your process like in general? I guess.
Oftentimes, I love spontaneous, improvisational, throw paint at the wall type of stuff. I've always found that really rad things come out of that. It's kind of like a combination of the complete extreme of that, and then the complete opposite end of like this hyper specified. All right, there's certain kind of rules I want to abide by, and certain things I really want to have happen, and things that will feel the most satisfying for the viewer. If we bring this in here and then have it come back in at this moment, and trying to find those really solid key moments where we can let the music really shine and do its thing, while helping, guide the story. It's kind of a combination of that. So for example, that scene, the women at Uber finally heard, that was a spontaneous, I just sat down and just started throwing paint at the wall just to see what would happen. It kind of sank into the heaviness of it. Other moments like the main theme, which then gets used in certain scenes throughout the show, speaking about the cab driver, and then Travis Kalanick also speaking to the camera, using those moments for hyper specific, kind of like, it kind of ties it all together, especially being a limited series. You have to kind of pick and choose those moments to really lean into those things that will kind of be hooks that people kind of take away. So honestly, it's a bit of both.
That's really interesting. You mentioned earlier Social Network being such like obviously on your mind. I know I don't, if you don't know if you're back or whatever, but obviously the show is an anthology series, limited series. Season 2 would focus on Facebook at that point. Have you like, I hope you come back because I love your work with Brian and David, but I mean, are you already thinking of like, oh, how will this sound before, like for this, and how can I worry about not moving away from Social Network even further, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I have honestly not thought about it at all. The only thing I've thought about is like, oh, that's an interesting thing that'll be this kind of parallel. And yeah, if I do end up working on it, it would just be a strategic thing to make sure it just needs to be authentically something that comes out of my sound and is assisting the story and everything. I think there's also something to be said about if you are hyper paying attention to something, really trying to emulate it, oftentimes you can kind of get there and it'll be your own maybe unique take on that type of thing. And also if you're really not trying to sound like something else, you might end up sounding like it because you're really trying not to, or you kind of create a little energy dynamic, So I'm sure I will think about that for a moment, but not try to do that too much, just to kind of like, it'll probably be a process of throw paint at the wall, get creative, see what's happening. Every once in a while, zoom out. Is this okay? And then if it is, dive back into it,
Yeah, that's great. But Super Pumped is out right now. You can watch all the episodes streaming on Showtime and all their related apps. It's a great show, and Brendan Angelides, your score is awesome, and you can listen to it right now on Spotify or any, like I said, any services. And I would suggest you do. Thank you for doing this. It was great hearing you speak about the process here.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.